My name is Jennifer Liptow. I am a research and content person with the Accounting Today brand. I'm going to introduce our two speakers that we have today, David Winslow and Clint Costa. I'm going to hand it over to Clint and to David and have them introduce themselves and kick us off. Clint?
Thank you, Jennifer, and hello, everyone. I'm Clint Costa, Senior Wealth Strategist at Corio. If you're not familiar with us, Corio is a nationwide wealth management firm. We live at the intersection of tax and wealth. A key part of our work involves collaborating with CPAs and accountants to support our mutual business owner clients. That brings us to today's webinar. Our goal is to equip and encourage you to have those challenging but crucial conversations about business transition planning. I like to think of this topic as the leg day of financial advising, tempting to skip, but so impactful when taken seriously. And speaking of leg day, I'm pleased to introduce my Corio teammate who never skips leg day, David Winslow. David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Clint. Thanks, Jennifer, for having us. As Clint mentioned, I mean, at Corio, we use this tagline that we're living at the intersection of tax and wealth. And so I spend most all of my day collaborating, working with, meeting with the public accounting industry and the people that work in it. And this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I spend almost all my time thinking about business owners, business transition, entrepreneurial exit event planning. So all of those topics and more. So it's a great topic. And, you know, as Clint starts to get into some of the material, I think it's really one of those pivotal conversations that the accounting industry needs to be having with their clients. I can't think of anything that's more important. Most all accounting firms today are focused on that middle market, somewhere between the $5 and $10 million revenue business, all the way up to the 500 million and above business. And so, you know, this is a topic that's kind of, to me, pivotal to the industry as a whole. And we look forward to sharing some insight with you guys.
Thanks, David. Yeah, and just a quick background on me. I mentioned I'm the Senior Wealth Strategist at Corio. What that means is I'm a reformed lawyer. So I practiced for 15 years, worked with business owners, high net worth families, individuals, entrepreneurs, and really focused very similarly to what David described on the legal side. And so with that being said, we'll go to our next slide. Sorry. Okay, so as we get into the presentation, what we really want to do is give you that backdrop, give you some of those definitional items. Let's level set, let's baseline. And to get into that, Jennifer, do you have a polling question for us?
Yes, I sure do. I just had to remember to take myself off mute. We sure do. Let's go to the polling question. So everybody, please make sure that you answer this polling question because I want to get you your credit. Okay, so are transition planning discussions with your business owner clients a standard practice at your firm? Yes or no? So, you know, transition planning, which the gentlemen are going to talk a little bit more about today, about, you know, what's next for them? What are they doing next? What's going on with them? Are you guys doing that or not? So I'm going to give you guys a couple of more seconds before I go ahead and close this poll. I'm told that I have to be a little bit patient and make sure to let all of you answer. So we'll do that for just a moment. I'm going to close it in just a couple of minutes, so make sure that you have answered. All right. So we've got a couple answers coming in. Anybody else? Yes or no? Looks like we've got our answers. Okay. Here we go. Yes and no. 57% say yes, 43% say no. Fellas, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I find that very interesting. I think it's, you know, what I also find interesting is always the question of, is it formally baked into your process, or is it just something that comes up naturally because you naturally care about your clients and find that these are issues to be talked about? David, any thoughts on your end?
No, I think the poll kind of validates what I see out when I meet with accountants. I think most are trying to have this conversation, and I think what we're going to focus on today is, for those that are doing it, how can you have the most impact? What's the best way to think about it? But yeah, I agree with kind of the polling findings.
Terrific. So let's move into some data. And as we set our baseline, I think we want to have a sense of what do we know about the state of owner readiness? Are owners thinking about transition planning in general, and do they have transition plans? And David, I think what this slide indicates is that while business owners are keenly aware that they should have transition plans and that transition planning is very important, they oftentimes don't have a transition plan, or certainly maybe not one in writing. Is this kind of jive with your experience in the industry and the market?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think, first of all, this comes from the Exit Planning Institute, and I think they've done a fantastic job of providing some real intellectual capital and framework around this conversation. And so if you're not spending a lot of time with them, you should be. So a shout out to the group there. I think, Clint, what I would hone in on to me is the 48% have done no planning at all. And when I saw the results of this, I coined a term, maybe embarrassment bias, because I really don't think it's that high. I mean, I think it's really more. I think it's more like 75 plus have done no planning at all. But I'm sure that when you ask a lot of business owners this, there's got to be a certain amount of embarrassment. Like if they haven't done anything and have not even thought about it, I'm sure that some of them are even reluctant to admit it. So if anything, really out of 10 meetings that I have, probably one or two anecdotally have engaged in even thinking about it and done some work towards it.
Yeah, I think that rings true. And I think in our next slide as well, what we see is really the breakdown of all the transition options, in general that exist for owners. And sometimes I think that in thinking about transition planning, it can be overwhelming for business owners. Is that your sense, David? And what are you seeing in the market right now in terms of these different slices of the pie in terms of what transition options are actually occurring?
Yeah, when you sent me this slide, Clint, I mean, there, a couple of things jumped out at me. Number one was that a true business strategic advisor needs to be fluent in a lot of different options, because there's the exit planning is not a one size fit all. There's a lot of different solutions, and the job of the enterprising advisor is to craft what's the best solution. And so you've got to have a working knowledge of how an ESOP works, or how do you do family business planning dynamics around that, or how do I engage with a private equity firm and start to think about events like that. So to me, it's a wake up call that you got to be fluent in a lot of areas as a business advisor. The other thing that kind of jumped out at me of this slide's a little bit dated, and I bet you if you did this study in real time today, that the private equity segment would be significantly higher than what you see here today. I mean, I'm seeing, it's the economic multiples and attractiveness of that have been driving most of our owners, or a lot of our owners, more in the private equity side. And that's got real implications for not only the clients, but our industry as a whole.
Yeah, those are great thoughts. I mean, I think what also jumps out to me here is, and what we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation, is the idea that doing this properly requires a team. As a formerly practicing attorney, I can tell you, I would sit with clients and they would ask me, well, what's the right move? What should I be doing? And I was woefully unprepared to answer that question. Could I answer very technical legal and tax questions about how an ESOP worked, or the benefits of a sale of personal goodwill? Sure. But what I couldn't answer were the questions around what should I do? What's going to produce the cash that I need to fund my retirement? Or what's the right option for me, knowing that I'm very highly invested in the business emotionally and personally. So I think this is one of those things that to me indicates the team approach is the absolute right approach when it comes to transition planning. And that takes us to our next polling question, Jennifer.
It sure does. I want to talk about a survey that we did recently with Choreo, and that will sort of help aid our conversation. Horizon, parent company of Accounting Today, in partnership with Choreo, found that some percentage of firms are either offering or interested in offering charitable and estate planning, among some other services that I have listed here. So my question to you guys is, how many of you are offering these services currently to your clients? And please select all that apply. College planning, charitable planning, estate planning. Obviously, these are all sort of core to what people do when they're planning. And so we really want to understand, what are you talking to people about? And that also speaks to the kind of potential transition planning that you're going to be speaking to them about, if you're already talking about these areas and these topics. So we will give everybody a minute or two to share with us what they're doing at their firm. I'm really interested to see the results of this. And just also, while I'm waiting, I want to highlight that coming out of this research, we will be doing an infographic and a white paper that we will actually be sharing with people in the Accounting Today space. So we look forward to sharing that with everybody there. Just going to close it out in just another second. All right, let's see what we found. All right, so it looks like, gentlemen, that we're seeing a lot of people are actually doing some of the estate planning, asset management, charitable planning, college planning. So would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this in terms of how people are already having some of these conversations and how that can tie into these conversations that you guys are talking about.
Yeah, I think, what rings true to me is that we all want to super serve our clients, and we want to provide as much impactful advice as we possibly can. So whether we're talking today about transition planning, or whether firms are starting to, really pull in some of these other areas of planning, I still think, right, that the team approach is the right approach, that none of us necessarily can do this on our own 100%. And so having the right team is key to that. David, what does this strike you as?
Yeah, it strikes me as that most public accounting firms now have really tried to transition to an offering that is much more strategic, as opposed to compliance driven, that, they're looking for avenues to add value on the planning side. And so, it doesn't surprise me about the estate planning. That's been a ground that they're well versed in from a tax, especially from a tax standpoint. But you're now seeing them get even deeper into the design elements of it, and thinking about how the planning elements work. So all great things for the industry as a whole.
Perfect. Very good. Okay. So moving on to the next part of the presentation, what we want to talk about next is really going to be some definitional level setting, right? David and I want to talk a little bit, and probably more anecdotally than anything. I don't know that some of these are susceptible to precise scientific definition. So first we want to talk about, right, if we're going to talk about transition planning, if we're going to talk about how to have these discussions, I think we first have to level set who are we talking with? Who are our clients? And here, David, we've sort of created two very broad buckets: the owner operator and the entrepreneur, indicating that both of those types, however a particular client may fall, will have different issues and different factors kind of weighing in. How do you think about those two categories? How would you kind of describe those categories?
Yeah, I mean, like the families that we work with, the clients that we work with, kind of fall usually normally into, two buckets. One is that kind of owner operator, think family owned company, where they literally have no desire to ever exit. Could they at some point, or could they be forced to at some point? Absolutely. But their current mindset is, maybe a first or second or third generation business. And the idea is they want to leave it to kids or keep it in the family, et cetera, et cetera. So, and the playbook for that group is very different than of the entrepreneur playbook, which is the, serial entrepreneur kind of profile that is going to build a business, sell that business for a crazy multiple. Maybe they go back into a new business. Maybe they go liquid and play golf and spend more time with their grandkids. But the reality of it is that, kind of the feel, the solutions, the conversations of those are very different conversations. And, a real skilled business advisor's got to be capable of navigating both those profiles super well.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think about the entrepreneur versus the owner operator as the entrepreneur may be a little bit less able to sort of control their own destiny, right? If you think about a tech company or a high growth company that's going to take on outside capital, at some point, very likely, unless you're Mark Zuckerberg, you're going to lose control of that company and you're going to ultimately sort of be on the timeline of third parties that are, determining when they want when the transitions need to take place. And so, you're dealing with maybe a little bit less certainty than, as you described, David, that owner operator that really controls exactly, in most cases, or at least, voluntary in the voluntary sense, gets to control their exit. I think transitioning then, no pun intended, into the next slide, a couple of different transition events, things that we consider planning around, both on the involuntary side. I think of that as death and disability or incapacity, right? Those are the unknown future events that can happen to an owner and really throw everything into a tailspin, versus those voluntary transition events that can certainly be planned for as well, a sale or some other sort of succession out or transition out. David, how do you view those events, and how do you prioritize those in planning for clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the way we think about it when we engage with a business owner or entrepreneur is we start with the involuntary. And the reason why is because I think, they can at least sense that there's a sense of urgency to make sure that they have protected themselves and their company and their stakeholders. And so I think it's an easier place to start the dialogue with a business owner by focusing in on the involuntary. So we're kind of using it as a springboard or entryway into having even a broader conversation about the long term. So it's just a softer sell with business owners to engage with them around, well, what are your plans for this company? What would you do if something happened to you, et cetera, et cetera. So, I met with a business owner last week who's built a very, awesome company lending money to software companies, for example. And it's a niche business, fantastic. He's a great operator of the business. And when we started talking about his involuntary transition issues, it was clear that it had not been addressed. I mean, younger guy, younger children. If anything, the stock would have been left to his spouse, his wife, should something happen to him. But there was really no planning done around that. And so you got to start there with, let's make sure we protect what that asset is before we go any further and talk about what the future may bring.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with voluntary transition events, what you often see, and this is true of, you see this in M&A deals all the time. There may have been something, there's corporate documentation, there's, unknown, newly discovered potential, state and local tax filings, any number of things that the business enterprise value, and the fact that everyone's moving in that same direction and wants the business to continue to succeed, you can overcome a lot in a voluntary transition. In that involuntary transition, you might not be able to, right? It's that unknown. And especially for those very high growth businesses where maybe the owner is very paper wealthy and there's, it's nothing but rainbows off in the distance. But at the same time, as you described, David, something happens tomorrow. What's going to happen to that company? It's a very precarious situation potentially. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I think we're going to next transition into and move into sort of talking about, okay, what are those objections, right? What do business owners, when we start to try to have these proactive discussions around transition planning, if it's not naturally coming up, and if it's naturally coming up, likelihood is it's because we are in the process of a sale or potentially something has happened. And now this is all very real to the business owner around an involuntary transition. But we got to, there are objections that we may need to overcome. So that's the next section. But before that, we'll have the next the next polling question, Jennifer.
Why, yes, we will. So, speaking of objections, what objections are you hearing from your clients about planning for business transitions? And please select all that apply. They can be anything from need to focus on this now, don't have time to focus on this now, it's low priority, waiting for a specific event. That's what we were just talking about. Then I'll focus on this fear of losing control through this process. I imagine for a lot of people that is a big challenge, particularly when their business is their baby, which I think is often the case with small business owners, and don't know where to start, which is a particularly good one to know because where to start might be with you. So love to hear your guys' thoughts on this. I think as the gentlemen are walking us through it, there's just a lot here. And so for you, if you're prepared when you start bringing this up with somebody to say, hey, here's why you really do need to focus on this now. Here's why this really does matter. I think there's real value in sort of having that and thought process in mind. And I think that some of the information that the fellows are talking about is particularly helpful for overcoming some of these objections. So we will give our participants just another couple of minutes here. Want to make sure we get all of your thoughts. All righty. I think it looks like we've got everybody. So let's see what the folks had to say. It looks like we have a few different things here. Don't have time to focus on this now. Don't know where to start. Need to focus on this now. Waiting for a specific event, then I'll focus on it in fear of losing control of my business. So really it looks like that don't have time. That's where we're starting there. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about addressing some of these challenges.
Yeah, I'm curious what David sees most typically with his clients. One thing I would just mention very briefly, we could have also potentially had this polling question, but the objections of the professional advisors and why might you not want to start these discussions. And one thing that does strike me, and it's very valid, right? It's if as advisors, we're going to our clients with something tried and true, right? For the accountants and CPAs on the webinar, if you're going to your client because you've perfected their 199 Cap A deduction, or they're about to put some real estate in service and you're going to go to them and show them how a cost seg is going to save them so much money, or you see in their AR that they're slow to collect, right? That's a really definable, tremendously valuable and definable service that has a pretty clear outcome. And if the client chooses not to do it, it's probably not because it didn't make sense to do. It's maybe something else. When you talk about something like succession planning, though extremely impactful, potentially, the situation is maybe a little bit different because we don't necessarily know where we're going to end up. And that we know that we're going to hopefully improve the situation, but we may not be able to define exactly what improvement means as we prospectively. So David, what do you think about these results?
Spot on. Don't have time is a common refrain I hear. I think, I'm sure most accountants appreciate this, but I certainly do because I'm doing this on a daily basis, which is a really strong entrepreneur business owner is consumed by the business. I'm working with very successful owners, and a big part of why they're successful is that they pour their blood, sweat, and tears into that business financially, emotionally, et cetera, et cetera. So, if you ask them for anything that falls outside of the scope of running this business to the very best of my ability, they're going to say they don't have time. So unfortunately, it's also, you'll hear some say, I don't even have time for my family, or I don't even have time to walk the dog, so much less business owners. So, worried about business transition. So doesn't surprise me in the least.
Yeah, a lot of agitated dogs that need walking that are being ignored by their business owner masters. As we move into then talking about objections and dealing with objections, obviously, I think what we've tried to identify here are some common objections to the different types of transition planning. So from a voluntary transition perspective, some typical objections that we see. David, I don't know if any of these in particular, I think you just raised it, that sort of the question of time, the question of losing control. I think speaking to maybe one of the earlier slides on all the options, right? So if we start to have this discussion, I think naturally as advisors, we want to kind of bring that discussion to some close and sort of say, hey, we're aiming at a particular type of voluntary transition, meaning let's get the ESOP experts in here, let's get the deal intermediaries and the investment bankers in here, and those are going to point to very specific ultimate successions, which actually might not be appropriate. And so maybe the more variables kind of point being, there's so many variables around what that transition looks like, where the business is, et cetera. But what do you think about that? What are some of the most common, besides time and time constraints, what are maybe some of the other objections you see in here in terms of planning for a voluntary transition?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is that they're not ready mentally, meaning that they're just not ready to make a transition. I mean, one of the phenomenons that I see a lot working with entrepreneurs is in a lot of cases, it becomes their identity. So, when you start talking about a voluntary transition, you're talking about changing their identity, because a lot of times this is how they're known in their community and to their employees and to their families. And so this idea of essentially losing your identity and dropping the ownership of this company is a pretty daunting proposition for them, Clint. I mean, so I think that's one. I think the other thing is, I guess, not on this list that I think it needs to be kind of talked about as part of this process, though, is the one thing that they can't control is the capital markets. A lot of times I hear, I'm not ready to do this. And one of the first things I push back on is, well, the capital markets sometimes aren't going to allow you to do it on the same timeline that you want to do it on, because, you have to sell your company or exit your company at an opportune time to maximize the value of that company. And, the capital markets dictate that. You cannot control that at all. And, we just came through a great recent example. 2021 was a great time to sell a company. EBITDA multiples were high. The cost of capital were low. There was a ton of private equity money. There still is, but it was a great time to sell a company. You fast forward into 2022, interest rates shoot up, EBITDA multiples get compressed. A lot of business owners are now sitting on their hands. If they were thinking about selling, are going to have to wait for the capital markets to be supportive of that. So it's a very kind of nuanced conversation, I guess, from my perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's really rings true. The emotional and psychological attachment to the business cannot be underestimated for the owner. Moving on then to some of the objections we see in planning for involuntary transitions. And David, I know you have a strong opinion on this one. What are your thoughts on some of the objections you see when you start to ask clients to think that they're not Superman or Superwoman, and maybe something might happen to them that they wouldn't foresee?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not. This isn't an objection, but I would say to the practitioners out there, the first hurdle is actually awareness. I mean, I meet with tons of entrepreneurs and business owners that aren't even aware that they've got risk of an involuntary transition. They don't understand what's even in their own shareholder agreement. They don't understand what their buy-sell agreement looks like, if they have one at all. So, I think the first hurdle is not even an objection. It's just bringing awareness to this before they can even get to a hurdle or an objective. But I would say that of all these, the one I see most frequently is optimism bias. I mean, I recently met with a business owner who has a business partner that just simply refuses to engage in conversations around any kind of transition planning, involuntary or voluntary. And his business, he's very frustrated by this, but the business owner that he works with, the partner he works with, is one of these people that believes it will all work out at some point and people can figure it out later. And so it's a very hard process getting him engaged with his respective partner to even have conversations. So we're strategizing on that as we speak.
Yeah, and I would say too, to your point, David, so many owners are in that sort of tweener zone around the involuntary transition question, meaning if we're talking about an owner operator with some family involvement in their business, and maybe the business was started with them, or maybe it's a second gen or third gen business, that next generation of from the owner, the children of the owner, sort of, maybe some are in the business, some are out, some are highly educated, some are maybe less motivated. And there's sort of this open question, like a decade of time is going to answer a lot of questions. That said, we don't want the owner to necessarily be, going around with no planning for the next decade. And so, that legacy uncertainty can really be a difficult question to answer. Sort of, what is the right answer? Where should the control of this company, assuming all things are equal and the owner has a sort of a management succession in mind, and that somebody who's already employed by the business could run the business without the owner, or a group of folks could run the business without the owner. What do you do when, your really smart daughter is out, pursuing a career, has maybe opened the door to be involved in the business at some point, and your son who's involved in the business is kind of, maybe seems very happy with more of a middling role, or more of an operational as opposed to a management role. It just leaves a lot of questions, and really opens itself up to a lot of discussion.
Absolutely.
So I think what that brings us to, and David already mentioned this, our very high conviction planning priority for our business owners is planning around that involuntary transition, because of the severity, right? The potential high severity impact of an unforeseen death, incapacity, disability, sickness, skiing accident, all of the things that can happen that can really take the owner out of that driver's seat, ultimately can affect not only, the owner, the business itself, I mean, even the community, right, David? We work with business owners where if a business were to go out of business all of a sudden, it would be a real problem, not just for the family, but the community in general.
Yeah, absolutely, Clint. And I think where my head goes when seeing the slide is, that high severity impact is where I think a true business advisor and a lot of accountants are uncomfortable going there, is a real emotional conversation about what is the what if you had some sort of severe impact, some sort of disability, death, or some sort of catastrophic event with the company. Like, that's an emotional topic for most business owners. I mean, you're talking about, these are things that are very, very important and treasured by a business owner. So, starting to have this conversation it brings in the emotion and will help to kind of drive some momentum around taking action. And then, in addition to the emotional aspect, that voluntary transition optionality notion. I love your phrase there, Clint, because I think it speaks to, this is the opportunity. This is the financial driver. Like, we're addressing the emotional, but the financial is like, let's make sure that this company is secure, because this is a company that may give your family multi-generational wealth, dynastic wealth even.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just anecdotally, I've sat with clients before who've, as business owners, and we're talking about, various estate planning strategies, techniques that involve transferring the business. And they say, I feel a little bit paralyzed because I am counting, all of the families, all the number of people that we, if we're, do some rough math, there may be literally 10,000, 12,000 humans who are in some way, shape, or form supported by this business. And so they feel the weight, of course, owners, feel the weight of that. And so as advisors, we have to feel the weight of that as well. But to your point, David, that doesn't mean don't do anything, right? We can't not, inaction is no answer. So, if we're talking then about really focusing on the involuntary transition planning effort as a starting point, right? Where do we start? How do we frame that out, and how do we think about that? And I think, David, our viewpoint is, as I said earlier, we believe in the team, the advisory team. We work with, our heritage is in CPA firms as Corio. We work with CPAs and accountants, also, of course, with attorneys and other trusted advisors of our clients. We really strongly believe in the team. Can you add some color to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's absolutely pivotal because all these are really complex areas of expertise. I mean, everybody's got their own fastball that's on this team, and so it's absolutely critical that not only you building the right team as the first step. That I like your term, well-oiled, and where I went with this was not only do you have to build the right team, you have to make sure that you've gotten the right rules of engagement for the team ironed out. People need to understand what their roles are, what their responsibilities are, what are their areas of expertise. Because what I typically see is a business owner would be able to identify the team and be able to pull them together, but it gets very dysfunctional fast. There's an art to making sure that this collaboration goes very, very well and that the team is operating like an orchestra. So that's the pivotal part that sometimes gets missed. And we have, a lot of skill sets around making sure that we get this team to collaborate effectively and provide the right kind of platform for a great engagement.
Yeah, agreed. And I'll indict my my former career as a practicing attorney. It has been known that attorneys will come in with big egos and will be very much wanting to own the room. But in fairness, that can happen by any number of these team members. So those interpersonal dynamics can be difficult, but well worth it and totally necessary. The other thing I would just mention, I think of up and down the size of companies, we put CFO, which I think is the best overall categorization, but I think as all the CPAs and accountants on this call will appreciate, sometimes businesses don't operate with someone you would call a CFO, even if maybe that's their title. You might call them a controller. You might just call them sort of the family manager, right? The person who's sort of tasked with all of the tasking and the things that sort of maybe cross over from a business and a personal perspective. It's the person who really gets things done. Similarly, along with getting the right people on the team and in the room, there's documents, right? There's information that you need, because I think in general, my sense is you want to do some thinking about this before you're really kind of taking up the owner's time, your client's time, right? There's, I think, plenty of room maybe for some broad discussion with the owner. Maybe those discussions have occurred naturally over the course of your relationship. But when you're really sort of trying to sort of understand, what does this involuntary transition look like? If you were, God forbid, if you were to pass away tomorrow, what is the right answer? And I think, David, to your point earlier, I agree 100%. In fact, in my career, I honestly cannot remember, and this may be my bias, but I cannot remember a time when I've actually cogently looked at, cogently looked at a buy-sell agreement that a business has in place, and have really that the owner knows what's in it, right? Or that it's appropriate for the situation. So pulling together these documents is also important. David, any thoughts on that?
No, the only thing I would add is, I mean, it's daunting for a business owner a lot of time to pull this together, which is your first sign that maybe the planning work hasn't been done. The other thing I would add quickly, I guess, Clint, would be, we take all this information at Choreo, we kind of review it all and kind of create a document we call a critical needs assessment, which is kind of like that strengths and weaknesses. Where are our gaps here? We want to prepare this written deliverable so that we can, sit down with the business owner and really give them some concrete ideas of, here's some places that we need to go. So.
Yeah, very good. All right. So once we've kind of gathered that information, we've gathered the team, we've gathered the documentation and the information that we need, sort of on to the main event, and really sort of first, I think, framing the discussion with the planning team. And so again, this is maybe a little bit of pre-work, but it's sort of like, okay, we've had the discussions among the team, we've gathered the data and the information that we need. And so now we're ready to have these discussions. And I think these are some of the broad picture questions that may come up, with the planning team around those involuntary transitions. And probably as to the tenor of what we've been talking about, owner readiness is probably a huge one, right? And everyone may have their own piece of the puzzle to sort of bring to the table and say, oh yeah, I've had those discussions, or playing golf or playing pickleball, maybe a more appropriate allusion, with the owner, with the client. They talked about this or that, or things that would indicate, yeah, maybe they are more ready or they're not, or this family member that passed away has really affected them in a way that's made them more ready. Those are the kinds of details that I think become important on any individual client to really make a determination as to what to do.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the only thing I would add there would be, we probably could add a fourth, which is owner willingness. And that's a conversation that we have to have. And, sometimes they're ready, but they're not willing, and that's okay. The other thing that kind of jumps to mind for me, Clint, is this notion that usually at this point of the conversation too, we start to kind of frame up what are those obstacles to these different options, like, owner readiness, exiting, what do the capital markets look like, time horizon, what are the obstacles there? Do we need to go faster? Do we need to go slower? So you got to kind of, also start to open that dialogue around, well, what could stand in our way of any of these options? Because I think that's a pivotal part of the conversation that accountants need to have.
Agreed. And then finally, actually, yeah, having that discussion with the owner, and how do you go about that? What are the best practices? David, I'll just throw it to you. What are some of the best practices that you've seen in having these multidisciplinary discussions with owners, and bringing in your best thinking along with the best thinking of all the people that the owner trusts and are most knowledgeable about the business?
Yeah, I mean, what I would add here, Clint, would be that I think this is probably one of the most pivotal moments of that relationship conversation with the business owner. And the reason why I say that is because I think up to this point, everything is very conceptual, meaning you're having a conversation about big picture topics, involuntary transition, the future, the exit. This is the stage of the conversation where it starts to get more real. So you're switching from what I would call a conceptual based conversation to a reality based conversation. And so this is probably the most, to me, kind of critical stage and kind of building that plan for the owner.
Yeah, agreed. I love number 2, address fears and biases. I'm have definitely served, as I think most of us who have been professional advisors, we have served as highly unqualified psychologists and psychiatrists to our clients. I always find fascinating any TED Talk or any, similar, item around the psychology of money, behavioral economics, behavioral finance. I think it's those things that really are the breakthrough for a lot of really impactful planning. And sometimes just talking about it enough helps the owner to get their arms around that. But I think those fears and biases are sort of the ones that sort of, oh, well, my son can't take, my son wouldn't be able to manage the business if I was gone. Well, it's like, is that actually true still? Or is that like your impression because when your son was 13, he messed up a science project, right? Or something like that. Something in the way of the family dynamic that is maybe keeping us from the right, getting to the right answers. And so I think that's also, important. So
Agreed.
having that discussion with the owner, obviously the team, and pulling together all the information and being really fully prepared to provide, have these discussions and at least chip away, right? Having an actionable timeline to get to the answer. And we kind of come to the question I think for CPAs, how do you do that? For CPAs and accountants on the line, how do you actually do this? How do you, if this sounds, something you want to do, maybe for the group that said, yes, we already do this, or maybe for the group that said, no, we don't regularly. What are the, some of the ways that a CPA or an accountant who's got that close relationship with the business owner, where do they begin with the process? David, what are your thoughts on how someone can kind of figure out, how do I start doing this?
Yeah, I mean, again, as I kind of led off with, I mean, I spend all day, spending a lot of time with accountants and collaborating with accountants because that's kind of where we live and that's what our world is. But what I would say is that anecdotally, accountants are incredibly good at identifying the clients that they think need to have the conversation, that they're very good at identifying the need. They really understand their clients. Generally, they've got a long relationship with them. They understand the business dynamics at play, and they've gotten very close to these business owners personally. So I think they're super skilled and great at identifying those clients. I think where I see the most area for improvement is more around how do you take that identification? This client needs to engage in this conversation and then transition that into actually action. I think that's the point where they're not as skilled and where someone like Choreo can help them in terms of engaging with the client alongside them with around, how do you actually start the process and start to move on that? So the other two things, I guess, anecdotally I'd mention would be a lot of this is about repetition. We do this all day, every day, and you build a Rolodex for the people old enough to know what a Rolodex is, but a Rolodex of an archive of situations that are similar to them, and that storytelling element is absolutely pivotal to get their buy-in into this person understands what I do. I think the final piece that kind of hit to me when you went to the slide was I think one of the other challenges is a lot of accountants, a lot of clients don't see their accountant's identity as that business advisor sometimes, and they see them as accountants and they think that they're not capable or skilled at leading them through this conversation, even though most of them are more than capable of leading through that conversation. But they're just branded as an accountant, essentially, instead of that business advisor. And that's a hurdle that, again, you just have to find a way around.
Yeah, I think, to your point, David, teaming up, right? That's our second bullet point. It's bringing in those other folks because we can be great. I mean, I'll tell you, my former law firm and my former law practice, we did not want for confidence in our approach. We felt very confident that we could solve every problem that the client had. So we had no problem bringing up a discussion like this. But I always knew, and one of the reasons I transferred, and sort of shifted my career into the wealth management world was that I knew we didn't have all the answers. I knew, in fact, there were all sorts of things that we didn't know the answer to that really needed to be taken into account in a variety of planning, contexts, including transition planning, succession planning, buy-sell planning, all of those sorts of things. So yeah, I think teaming up, it's just one of those things. It's like anything. We don't know what we don't know. And so having a comfortable team dynamic, right? That's really important. And, it's really also once you kind of get that team process started, once you find out sort of who has the big ego in the room, you can determine, can we work with this person? Is this going to be possible? And, maybe adjust your approach from there. But I agree, David. I think every professional advisor who's in tune with their clients probably has a really good sense of for whom this type of planning is really appropriate. And so that takes us to our conclusion in our Q&A. I think what we just wanted to highlight before we kind of open it up is, really, again, what might compel, so maybe not what compels you as an accountant or a CPA to take action, but for the rest of us watching you and in awe of what you do with your clients and how you help your clients, like what really compels CPAs in particular to be the ones to take this jump and lead this planning effort and get it kick-started. And I always come to, I think, David, you mentioned it, and I think you hit it spot on. It was really that point of CPAs tend to be, for a business owner, that tends to be the lifeblood, right? That's the first choice advisor to a lot of businesses, because the business is the life, the business is the second or third or fourth kid in the family. And the CPA is sort of, in that case, to extend that that metaphor, the pediatrician, so to speak, very important advisor that you deal with all the time. What do you think about that, David? What about that CPA relationship and really getting this transition process started?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. First, that the accounting industry has earned the trusted business advisor moniker through a lot of blood, sweat, and tears too. I mean, they have a very strong moral compass of independence that their clients value, and you can always count on 99.9% of accountants to do the right thing for their clients, essentially, and be guided by the mission of doing what's in the best interest of their client. They're very, in a good way, predictable in that way. The other side of the conversation, though, is that I try to stress with our business partners in public accounting is this is great for business too. You know, a lot of the best managed accounting firms that have broader service lines are recognized that exit and business transition planning allows you to showcase your entire platform of suite of services, from tax, your audit, quality of earnings, valuation work, business consulting, IT consulting. I mean, it really allows you to demonstrate the full breadth of accounting services if you all bring them to bear for helping a client through this process. The other thing that they need to focus on, though, I think, and that's where Choreo comes in, is this notion that you don't have all the answers and you don't have all the expertise. So it's about building that partnership with firms like ours that can deliver the missing elements to a total package, Clint.
Very good. And with that, Jennifer, we'll turn it back to you. Our content, we're through our content, and yeah, happy to take questions or follow up.
Absolutely. We got another 5 or 6 minutes, and an absolutely fantastic question just came in, which is, have you found situations where CPAs are hesitant to recommend transition of ownership because they risk the chance of losing a long-term client? And I love this question because it's something that I've talked about a lot with Choreo before. So tell us your thoughts on this one.
David, what do you think about that?
Great question, John, first of all, and thanks for chiming in. I think, I don't know if I've seen that risk a great deal. I would answer a little bit different way. I mean, a lot of accounting firms, though, have started to partner with firms like Choreo, or possibly even build their own wealth management practices, because of this notion that if I do walk a client through this transition and they exit, the revenue could walk out the door, and they see wealth management as a solution or a hedge that, in a lot of respects, being able to do the wealth management work after an exit could be very much more profitable than actually the work was that they were doing for the client. And so, again, for those best managed firms, I think that's where you're seeing them think creatively about how can we maintain that relationship with that business owner, regardless of an exit event. You like that, Clint? Yeah. I turned into a commercial, right? I'm skilled like that, Clint.
Better you than me, David. I was going to go there, but probably far less eloquently. I was just going to say along those lines, similarly, I think, and we saw that, I think, early on in one of the very first polling questions or second polling question in the research that Jennifer and the Accounting Today team is doing in conjunction with Choreo. And to be quite honest, it's something we saw. It was a theme that was hit on, and I'll do a plug for the Accounting Today Private Equity and Accounting Summit. That was a great summit, a great event back in November here in Chicago, where I'm at. Accounting firms, right, are just constantly trying to, as David said, increase the platform, do more planning, do more things. So I agree with the premise of John's question. John, I agree with you. Sometimes what happens is you sort of have this great business tax and business service kind of relationship with a client, and then that client transitions out, or the relationships change, or maybe they sell and now they're sitting on a big pile of money. I tend to think that that's an opportunity to continue with the planning, continue with those families, because likely they're not going to just leave that maybe necessarily all in dry powder. They're going to want to invest in other businesses, or get more, get deeper into their estate plan. And so I think that's really an exciting moment and can be an exciting moment with the right partnership, as David described.
And I'm going to add a question onto that for you guys too, because something I think about a lot with business owners and business owner clients is that they're also individual people with individual accounting needs and individual things along those lines. So to a certain extent, wouldn't the CPA being a part of this process and being a part of the team that you discussed actually open some additional opportunities for them in their firm with the family?
Absolutely. David, what do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think again, what accountants have done, and they've done it very, very well for a very long time, is being able to kind of be that trusted advisor personally, professionally, in every respect, and be able to kind of leverage that credibility into a lot of different roles for them. So absolutely agree.
Fantastic. Any final thoughts for the two of you? We've got about another minute or two. Anything that you want to leave our audience with as we start to wrap up?
I think what I would say first, and then David, feel free to wrap up, is just that, it's a path that can start with just a few steps. And so if I was going to bring up one very tangible step, we talked about it a little bit earlier, get out that buy-sell agreement, blow the dust off of it, and bring that up to the client. This is what would happen if you passed away, if you became disabled, if your business partner went off to Costa Rica to learn how to surf. This is what would happen. Is this still appropriate? And if it is, great. And if not, there may be more to do.
Yeah, Clint, my ad would be is I think in my experience with working with a lot of even very skilled veteran accountants, there's a hesitation to kind of go down this road because they think that they're supposed to have the answers to everything, and you're never going to have that. I've been doing this for a very long time, and I'm frequently amazed at I see something I've never seen before, and I'm not prepared for it. And I think that's terrifying for a lot of accountants that live inside tax codes or audit standards, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a topic that's a difficult one for them to do. And I think one of those elements is being self-aware of that, but also, as I mentioned earlier, it's about repetition. So I think for a lot of accountants, if they can partner with somebody and see it brought into action, they're going to be able to do that over time themselves very, very well. And so certainly reach out to us if we can help.
Thank you, both of you, so much, David, Clint, for your time today. So many useful insights, so many great takeaways. Thank you to our audience who joined us today. Thank you for being here. It makes it so we're not just talking to ourselves. I wish everybody a terrific day and look forward to seeing you again on another Accounting Today event. Thank you.